Hey folks, welcome back to Carbon Garage. Today we're going to have a quick look at the TVR, do a bit of a review of it, tell you a bit what it's like to drive, and hopefully convince you that this is an awesome car and maybe you should buy one. So let's get started. So the first question you always get asked is, what actually is this car? What is a TVR Chimaera? TVR were a relatively small scale British manufacturer. They've existed for about 70 odd years, and they basically made, certainly laterally, sort of very fast, very lightweight cars. So the Chimaera is an example of which is actually one of their more luxurious offerings, designed more for sort of grand touring than it is for outright speed. But that doesn't really say anything about sort of sporting credentials. You know, it's still a very hardcore sports car by pretty much anybody's standards. At the front you've got a 4-litre V8, you've got a limited slip differential at the back going to just the rear wheels, there's no power going to the front, absolutely no driver's aids whatsoever, no traction control, no ABS, so it's all about sort of man and machine working together sort of perfectly, just like the good old days. The bodies are made out of fiberglass, which makes these cars incredibly light, so it weighs around about 1,000 kilos, which obviously for a car that's got a 4-litre V8 up front is hardly anything. Note to 60 is done in around about 5 seconds, depending on how good you are at working the clutch. Top speed's probably around about 140, 150 miles an hour, something like that. TVR is a company which is just surrounded by sort of myths and misconceptions. Because not many people have actually owned or driven these cars, there's not many sources of truth to sort of clarify what they're actually like to own and drive. And before I bought one, I sort of believed a lot of these things as well. So a very common one is that these are essentially muscle cars, you know, very big engine up front and sort of not much happening in the handling department. And that misunderstanding was part of what made me hold off buying one for as long as I did. So it came as a genuine surprise to me when, getting behind the wheel, I realised that this was actually one of the best handling cars I'd ever driven. And in fact, it is without a doubt the best driver's car I've ever driven. And I think there's two key parts when you're talking about a car's handling. The first one is how technically capable actually is it, which sort of transcribes to how quickly can you get from point A to point B. And the second part is how does it feel? And even within that, there's a couple of parts as well. So you could have a car which is very capable, but because it doesn't really inspire confidence, although you know the limit is very high, you can't actually really get anywhere near it. And that was kind of the sensation that I had when I had my Audi TT. You know, that car just had unlimited grip available, but it was so sort of uninvolving to drive, you would never dare actually go anywhere near it at anything above about 30 miles an hour. Something like a Mazda MX-5 or even my Abarth has a very high level of grip and absolutely phenomenal sort of feel and confidence. So even at lower speeds, you can have a lot of fun with it, you can really push it up to the limit. To sort of draw a comparison, I would say the TVR probably has more outright grip than the MX-5s or the Abarths have, and it feels even more involving and it gives you so much confidence. On a back road you can push this car so hard, you can have so much fun with it. In another video I explained that the front tyres have a higher sidewall than the rears. The front wheels are actually an inch smaller in diameter than the rear wheels are. And I think that probably contributes quite a bit to the spectacular sort of turn in confidence you have. Like, I can honestly say, you know, I've had this car for years, I've driven it in essentially all weathers, and I've never had this car understeer in anything other than like really low speed, really tight turns. The front end grip is just absolutely superb. Overall, the balance goes slightly towards oversteer, as you would expect, and you can really sort of drive around that. You know, you can use the throttle to balance the car, which gives you spectacular levels of control. Power delivery is really linear. And when you look at the torque curves for these cars, they're very flat. So you get almost as much torque at around about 1500 RPM as you do up at 6000 RPM, which means that you can basically tootle around in fifth gear at 20 miles an hour like we're doing here. It also means that you've always got usually at least 2 gears that are genuinely available at any time, which means on a twisty back road you don't have to worry so much about constantly changing gear. Of course you can if you want. The gearbox is really, really nice. It's a Borg Warner T5 gearbox, which was in a lot of sort of mid-size saloons, so things like the Ford Sierra had it, for example. And it's a really, really nice gearbox. The linkage that TVR have put between the actual shifter here in the cabin and the box itself is so precise, and like proper sort of shotgun style, just absolutely amazing. Even the MX-5 gearboxes, in comparison, they feel average. It's not the fastest gearbox in the world, like compared to the MX-5, where you really can absolutely sling it between gears as quickly as you want. You're not going to manage that here, but to be honest, with the way that the power is delivered, you don't really need that anyway. So let's talk a little bit about brakes. They're pretty good. They're probably the best brakes I've ever experienced. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean they'll stop the car in the quickest possible time, because I don't think they will. I think the Boxer's brakes were probably better. They were much bigger, the tyres were much wider as well, which gives you more grip available to stop. But what the TVR's brakes do have is absolutely phenomenal pedal feel. I've never driven a car with a brake pedal as nice as this one. It's really, really firm, and it gives you so much confidence. You can really sense when the brakes are at the point of locking up. Steering feedback is pretty incredible as well. It's hydraulic power assisted steering, so unlike a lot of modern cars that have the electric systems which sort of dampens down the feel, you don't have any of that. It's really, really precise. Gives you a lot of confidence as well. It's really easy to push this car hard because of the level of feedback that you get. What I think really sets this car apart though, especially compared to a lot of the sort of performance cars available on the market today, is when TVR built this car in the 1990s, when they designed it in the 1990s, the Nürburgring wasn't really a thing. Like, it existed, but it wasn't this sort of benchmark that it seems to be for so many cars today. So I can guarantee you that at no point did Peter Wheeler, the chairman of TVR, think, I'm going to see how quickly one of my cars can lap the Nürburgring. In fact, what he would have done is they would have left the factory in Blackpool and they would have gone onto a road not that dissimilar to the one that we're on just now, one that's got lots of cambers going in lots of directions, a few potholes, crappy little repairs that haven't been done properly because the councils are all working to a budget. And he'll have made a car that was as good as it could possibly be on a road like that. And the thing is that that's what every road in Britain is like. Our roads are not like a silky smooth racetrack surface. They're generally pretty horrible. So when you design and build a car for those roads, you end up with a car that works absolutely brilliantly on those roads. The thing that everybody talks about when they talk about TVRs is the sound. They made absolutely no effort to try and be apologetic. These are hardcore sports cars through and through, and the exhausts really reflect that. There's no little button on the dashboard that you press that makes it quieter or anything like that. It is what it is, and you've got to love it for that. There are of course some things in this car which aren't absolutely perfect. The heater is not the best. It's fine on a day like today when it's 20 degrees outside, but most of the time in Scotland it's 8 degrees. In fact, it's always 8 degrees in Scotland. And when it's 8 degrees outside, the heater is probably only just able to keep you hot enough with the roof down. Having a big engine kind of right there and a big gearbox right here when you have the roof on this car, it does get quite hot inside, and it's not got air conditioning. So you do spend a lot of time not at the temperature you'd ideally like to be, but you can easily fix that by always having the roof down and then wearing a nice pair of driving gloves. If you were to compare this to the Abarth, there are obviously some differences. One of the key ones is just the amount of power and torque available. This is a far faster car, there's just no two ways about that. It's probably also a much better handling car. It's definitely a car which inspires much more confidence. So even if, like I was saying earlier, the absolute level of grip isn't quite as high, you'll have more confidence to push near that maximum level, which overall probably will make it a bit quicker. It's a much harder car to drive well. I think almost anybody could get into the Abarth, and without sort of much time to get familiar with it, they could drive it reasonably hard and they could have a lot of fun in it. In contrast, the TVR is a much harder car to drive. As it has in another video, the steering's pretty heavy, the clutch is really heavy, the throttle pedal is really heavy, and if you're not used to driving cars with sort of proper performance brakes, and by that I mean ones that have really solid brake pedals, you're not going to like the brakes either. Gear shift is pretty heavy, the handbrake's really heavy. Basically everything's really heavy. And a lot of people wouldn't really like that in a car. I talked a little bit more about reliability in another video, so I won't go into any real detail here about some of the work I've had done on this car, but I will just bust the myth that these cars are not reliable, because basically they are. 70+% of the parts in these cars are just off the shelf from mainstream manufacturers. It's really just all the things that you see and feel and interact with are the things that TVR made themselves. So basically nothing goes wrong because they've had all the research and development and testing that any mainstream manufacturer would have had at the time. And yeah, they're definitely going to be higher maintenance than a Ford Mondeo is going to be, but it's kind of, I think you come to expect that from any sort of sports car, especially one built in the sort of volumes that these are. And while any car can break down, I don't think there's any real reason that would make the TVR more likely to than sort of any other car of similar age. And as long as you maintain them well, there's no real reason why it should break down at all. Parts are really easy to come by, like there's hardly anything for this car which is actually hard to get. And they're also all pretty cheap, because generally speaking, especially compared to similar cars, everything's reasonably mainstream on it. So it doesn't have absolutely massive carbon ceramic brake discs or, tyres that are 6 feet wide. It has reasonably wide tyres, it has reasonably big brakes, but reasonably sensible sizes relative to something like, a Porsche 911. Obviously, you don't buy cars like these for sort of creature comforts, so you're not going to get things like satellite navigation or massive CD changer or anything like that. You do have a radio, you do have reasonable quality speakers. Chances are that no car has what they left the factory with today. They've probably all been upgraded. So there's no point really telling you about the quality of them because it's going to be as good as the setup that's in it. As far as safety systems go, this car actually comes with a surprisingly sophisticated one, and it analyzes millions of points of data like every minute. It's constantly looking for hazards and it's doing everything that it can to basically stop you from dying. And that is, of course, the human behind the wheel who is paying attention because they know if they're not, that things are going to go wrong. Now, this is not a car which does anything to really help you out. Like I said earlier, there's no computer magic going on anywhere, and if you do get it wrong, there's no airbags, there's no seatbelt pretensioners, there's nothing like that to help you out. But the only thing it will do is it will stop the fuel pump if it rolls over to stop it from catching fire. So that's it from Carbon Garage this time. Hope you found this video useful. If you enjoyed it, please click like, please comment, and of course if you want to catch more content like this one, please subscribe.